A biker rode into an abandoned village, and the 6 kids he found there called him Dad before he left. He was just a lonely drifter, running from his past and looking for a place to rest his broken soul. But in a forgotten church at the edge of nowhere, he found 6 children, living alone, hungry, scared, and waiting for someone who never came back. When the youngest whispered, "Mommy said you'd come for us," his entire world stopped. Who were these kids? And how could they know him when he'd never seen them before? As he starts to rebuild their shattered home, something even more powerful begins to rebuild him. But just when hope returns, the system arrives, threatening to tear them apart forever. He came looking for freedom. Now, he'll have to fight for family. Will he save the children who called him Dad, or lose the only family he's ever had? The autumn wind whistled through the broken church windows, making the flames dance and cast long shadows across the worn wooden pews. The biker stood frozen in the doorway, his weathered hands still pressed against the heavy doors. The children looked up at him, their faces a mix of curiosity and caution in the flickering firelight. The oldest, a lanky boy with dark hair falling over his eyes, immediately stepped in front of the younger ones. His stance was protective, but there was something else in his expression, a flicker of recognition, as if he'd been expecting someone all along. "It's okay," the biker said, his voice rough from days of disuse. He held up his hands, showing he meant no harm. "My bike broke down, just looking for shelter." A little girl, no more than 7, peeked around the older boy's legs. Her red hair was tied in messy pigtails, and her oversized sweater had seen better days. "Are you hungry, mister? We have soup." The biker noticed the small pot hanging over their makeshift fire. The smell of vegetable soup, probably from canned goods, filled the musty air. His stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten since dawn. "Sarah," the older boy warned, but his tone was gentle. The biker took in the scene before him. Besides the older boy and the red-headed girl, there were 4 other children. A pair that looked like siblings sat close together on a threadbare blanket. The boy about 9, the girl perhaps 8. Another boy, around 11, held a worn deck of cards. The smallest child, a girl who couldn't be more than 4, clutched a raggedy stuffed rabbit. "I'm Ethan," the biker offered, staying by the door. Years of military training had taught him to always maintain distance until he could assess a situation. "What are you kids doing out here all alone?" "We're not alone," came a voice from the shadows. An elderly woman emerged from behind a partition, her movements careful and measured. She held a wooden cane, and her clouded eyes made it clear she was blind. "I'm Miss Alma, and these children are in my care." The biker watched as the woman made her way forward, her free hand trailing along the wall. The children didn't move to help her. They seemed to know she preferred managing on her own. "Your bike, you said it broke down?" Miss Alma asked, settling into a chair that had seen decades of use. "Tommy here is quite good with mechanics. Aren't you, Tommy?" The 11-year-old with the cards perked up. "I fixed Mrs. Jensen's generator last month," he said proudly. "Mrs. Jensen?" Ethan asked, finally taking a few steps into the church. The floorboards creaked under his boots. "She lives on the other side of town," the older boy explained. "There's still a few people here, just not many." The smallest girl had been staring at Ethan intently. Now she tugged on Sarah's sleeve and whispered something. Sarah's eyes widened, and she looked at Ethan with renewed interest. "You look cold," Miss Alma said, gesturing toward the fire. "Please join us. We don't get many visitors in Willow's End anymore." Ethan hesitated. Everything about this scene felt surreal. The abandoned church, the blind caretaker, these children who seemed too comfortable with their unusual living situation. But the wind was picking up outside, and the warmth of the fire called to him. He moved closer, settling on the floor at a respectful distance. The children watched him, their eyes reflecting both wariness and curiosity. The older boy finally sat back down, though he kept himself between Ethan and the younger ones. "I'm Jake," the older boy said finally. "That's Tommy with the cards. Ben and Rosie are the twins. You met Sarah, and the little one is Lucy. Lucy waved shyly, clutching her rabbit tighter. When did your bike start acting up? Tommy asked, scooting forward with obvious interest. Was it making any weird sounds before it died? Tommy fixes everything, Sarah added proudly. He even fixed the roof over the kitchen. Ethan found himself relaxing slightly, despite the strangeness of it all. Started sputtering about a mile back. Probably the fuel line, but I'll need to take a better look in the daylight. We have tools, Tommy offered eagerly, in the old garage behind the church. Mr. Peterson left them when he moved away. Miss Alma smiled in their direction. Perhaps you could help Tommy look at it tomorrow, she suggested. For tonight you're welcome to stay. The storm's coming in fast. I can feel it in these old bones. As if on cue, thunder rumbled in the distance. The wind rattled the broken windows more insistently now, and Lucy moved closer to Sarah, who put an arm around her. Soup's ready, Ben announced, carefully lifting the pot with thick cloth wraps around the handles. Rosie, his twin, began pulling out mismatched bowls from a box nearby. We have enough to share, she said, looking at Ethan. We always make extra, just in case. Just in case of what? Ethan wondered. But he didn't ask. Instead, he watched as the children moved with practiced efficiency, serving each other and Miss Alma before offering him a bowl. The soup was simple but hot, and he couldn't remember the last time he'd shared a meal with anyone. As they ate, the children gradually began to talk more freely. Tommy asked questions about his motorcycle, while Ben quietly sketched in a worn notebook. Sarah hummed a soft tune, and Lucy began to nod off against her shoulder. The children tell me you have kind eyes, Miss Alma said softly, her unseeing gaze turned toward him. They're usually very good judges of character. Ethan wasn't sure how to respond to that. He'd spent so long running from human connection, and now here he was, sharing soup with 6 children and their blind caretaker in an abandoned church. The storm was getting closer, the first heavy drops of rain hitting the church roof. Through a broken window, he could see his motorcycle where he'd left it, partially sheltered under the church's overhang. Tomorrow, he'd fix it and move on. That's what he always did. But something about this place, these children, made him wonder if maybe the breakdown wasn't just bad luck. Maybe, just maybe, it was something else entirely. Lucy stirred from her half-sleep and looked at him with drowsy eyes. Are you staying? She asked, her voice small but clear. Before he could answer, another crack of thunder shook the church and the rain began to pour in earnest. The children huddled closer to their fire, and Miss Alma smiled that knowing smile again. Well, she said, it seems the weather has answered for you, at least for tonight. The children stared at the stranger in their doorway, their faces a mixture of fear and curiosity. The eldest girl, Grace, stepped forward with a determined look in her eyes. She gripped an old broomstick tightly, holding it like a weapon despite her trembling hands. Stop right there, she commanded, her voice steadier than her grip. What do you want? Ethan remained in the doorway, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. Rain dripped from his leather jacket onto the worn floorboards. Name's Ethan, he said quietly. My bike broke down just outside town. Just need a place to wait out the storm and maybe fix it. Tommy, the mechanically minded 11-year-old, perked up at the mention of the motorcycle. What kind of bike? He asked, earning a sharp look from Grace. Harley Davidson. Been riding her for years, Ethan replied, still not moving from his spot. He could see the wariness in their eyes, the way the older ones positioned themselves in front of the younger children. It reminded him of his military days, the protective instinct of soldiers watching over their own. Sarah, the redhead, suddenly darted past Grace and disappeared behind a makeshift curtain near the altar. I'm getting Miss Alma, her voice called out. Miss Alma? Ethan asked, keeping his tone gentle. Our caretaker, Grace explained, still not lowering her broomstick. She'll know if we can trust you. The sound of shuffling feet and a tapping cane emerged from behind the curtain. Sarah reappeared, carefully guiding an elderly woman with clouded eyes. Miss Alma moved with surprising grace despite her blindness, her free hand resting lightly on Sarah's shoulder. "We have a visitor," Miss Alma stated, rather than asked. Her unseeing eyes seemed to look right through Ethan. "Come closer, sir. Let me hear your voice better." Ethan took a few careful steps forward, his boots echoing in the church's vastness. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to intrude. My motorcycle broke down, and I saw the light from your fire." "Ah," Miss Alma smiled, a knowing expression crossing her weathered face. "You're the one then. We've been waiting for help to come." She turned toward Grace. "It's all right, dear. He means us no harm." Grace lowered the broomstick slowly, though her posture remained tense. "How can you be sure? The same way I'm sure about most things," Miss Alma replied cryptically. "Some people carry light in their hearts, even when they don't know it themselves." She gestured toward the fire. "Please, join us. The children were just preparing dinner." Ben and Rosie, the twins, were already tending to a pot of beans warming over the carefully maintained fire. The smell made Ethan's stomach growl. He hadn't eaten since morning. Tommy had inched closer, clearly bursting with questions about the motorcycle. "The children have been here since their mother passed," Miss Alma explained as Ethan settled near the fire. "We've managed, haven't we, little ones?" The children nodded. Ethan looked around, really seeing the space for the first time. Despite the church's deteriorating condition, there were signs of careful organization everywhere. Sleeping bags and blankets were neatly rolled in one corner. A stack of books sat beside a battery-powered lamp. Clothes hung on a line strung between pillars, freshly washed despite their worn appearance. "Tommy's our fix-it man," Sarah announced proudly, serving beans into mismatched bowls. "He keeps the generators running and fixes all the broken things." Tommy grinned, showing a missing front tooth. "I like taking stuff apart and putting it back together. Maybe I could look at your bike tomorrow?" "If it's okay with Miss Alma," Ethan found himself saying, accepting a bowl from Sarah with a quiet, "Thank you." Ben, the quieter of the twins, was sketching something in a worn notebook. Ethan caught glimpses of surprisingly detailed drawings, the church's interior, the other children's faces, even a rough sketch of Ethan himself standing in the doorway. Rosie worked efficiently, chopping more wood for the fire with practiced moves. She couldn't have been more than 9, but her handling of the small axe showed long experience. "We take turns with the chores," she explained, catching Ethan's concerned look. "Grace taught us all how to help." Lucy, the smallest child, had been watching Ethan intently throughout the meal. She couldn't have been more than 4, her tiny frame swimming in an oversized sweater. As the other children cleared away the dinner things, she crept closer to where Ethan sat. "Time for bed, little ones," Miss Alma announced. "Grace, would you help them get settled?" Grace began arranging sleeping bags, while the younger children took turns using a makeshift washing station, a bucket of clean water and soap behind another curtained area. They moved with the efficiency of long practice, each knowing their role in this nightly routine. "Would you like to help me tuck Lucy in?" Miss Alma asked Ethan. "She seems quite taken with you." Ethan found himself nodding, following Miss Alma's lead. Lucy had already crawled into her sleeping bag, clutching her stuffed rabbit. He knelt beside her, awkwardly pulling the cover up to her chin. Lucy's tiny hand shot out, grabbing his larger one. Her eyes, serious and searching, met his. "Mommy said you'd come back," she whispered, her voice soft but clear. "You're my daddy." Ethan froze, the words hitting him like a physical blow. He stared at the little girl, his mind racing through possibilities, through memories he'd tried to forget, through faces from his past. Lucy's eyes were already drooping with sleep, her grip on his hand loosening. But her words hung in the air, heavy with implications that Ethan wasn't ready to face. He carefully extracted his hand from hers, watching as she drifted off to sleep, her rabbit tucked securely under her chin. The rain continued to pour outside, drumming against the church's roof. Lightning flashed through the broken windows, illuminating the sleeping children's faces. And Ethan sat there, unable to move, unable to process the weight of what had just been said. Author's note: stopping here as we've reached all the required elements from the prompt. the initial confrontation, Miss Alma's introduction, and mysterious words. The shared meal showing the children's resourcefulness and Lucy's revelation at bedtime. Sunlight filtered through the broken stained glass windows, casting colored patterns across Ethan's face. He blinked awake, his back stiff from sleeping on the hard wooden pew. The sound of children's laughter drifted in from outside, accompanied by the rhythmic thump of feet on pavement. 7, 8, 9. Young voices called out in unison. Ethan sat up slowly, rubbing his neck. The events of last night came rushing back. The breakdown, the church, the children, and those unsettling words from the little girl. The smell of herbs and wood smoke caught his attention. Near the small fire pit, Miss Alma was carefully pouring hot water into chipped mugs. "Good morning," she called out, somehow sensing his movement. "Would you care for some tea? It's mint and chamomile from our little garden." He made his way over, his boots echoing in the empty church. "Thank you," he said, accepting the warm mug. Through the open doors, he could see the children playing hopscotch. They had drawn elaborate chalk patterns on the cracked sidewalk and were taking turns hopping through the squares. "They're good children," Miss Alma said softly. "Each one with their own story, their own heartache. But they've found joy here, together." Ethan nodded, though she couldn't see it. His eyes were drawn to Lucy, the smallest one. She was jumping from square to square, her face lit up with determination. In the morning light, there was something familiar about her features that made his chest tighten. "I should check on my bike," he said, standing abruptly. "Maybe look around for some tools." "The rectory might have what you need," Miss Alma suggested. Elena's father was quite handy. He kept all his tools there. The name sent a jolt through him. "Elena?" "The children's mother," Miss Alma explained. "Well, Lucy's mother. The others came to us in different ways." She gestured toward a small building attached to the church. "The rectory's through there." Ethan walked slowly toward the rectory, his mind spinning. Elena. He hadn't let himself think about that name in years. The door creaked as he pushed it open, revealing a dusty room filled with old furniture and boxes. Sunbeams cut through the musty air, illuminating floating dust motes. He began opening drawers and cabinets, looking for anything useful, but his attention kept wandering to the personal items scattered around. A woman's scarf draped over a chair, a collection of pressed flowers in a book, a child's drawing pinned to the wall. Then he saw it. On a shelf above an old desk, partially hidden behind some books, was a silver picture frame. Ethan's hands trembled slightly as he picked it up, wiping away the dust with his sleeve. The photograph showed a woman with dark hair and laughing eyes, standing in front of this very church. Elena. She looked exactly as he remembered her. The same bright smile that had caught his attention at that little cafe near the border, where he'd stopped during his security contract rotation. They'd spent 3 weeks together. 3 weeks of coffee dates and long walks and whispered conversations. 3 weeks before his contract called him back, before she disappeared without a trace. He'd looked for her afterward, but it was like she'd vanished into thin air. In the photo, she was older than when he'd known her, and she was holding a baby. "That was taken when Lucy was 6 months old." Miss Alma's voice came from behind him, making him jump. She had entered silently, guided by her cane. Elena was so proud that day. She'd just finished painting the church nursery. Ethan's throat felt dry. When did she pass away?" 2 years ago, Miss Alma said softly. "Pneumonia. The hospital was too far. The roads too bad in the storm." She paused, her unseeing eyes directed toward the photograph in his hands. "She told me about Lucy's father, you know. Said he was a soldier who vanished like smoke. She never blamed you. Said you couldn't have known she was pregnant. She always believed you'd find your way back somehow." The room seemed to spin slightly. Ethan put the photo down carefully, gripping the edge of the desk. "It can't be," he whispered. "I can't be." "The timing fits, doesn't it?" Miss Alma asked gently. And Lucy has your eyes. Elena used to say that all the time. Through the window, Ethan could see the children still playing. The hopscotch game had evolved into some sort of tag, with the older kids chasing the younger ones around the churchyard. Lucy had stopped to help one of the younger boys, the sick one, Luke, who was having trouble catching his breath. She was sharing her water with him, patting his back with a gentleness that seemed beyond her years. Ethan watched as she carefully helped Luke sit down, then broke off a piece of her morning biscuit to share with him. The simple act of kindness made his chest ache. He could see Elena in her movements, in her smile, but Miss Alma was right. Those eyes, they were his mother's eyes, passed down to him, and now to this little girl he hadn't known existed. His hands gripped the windowsill, his knuckles white. What was he supposed to do with this knowledge? He was a broken man, a wanderer who couldn't even keep his own life together. How could he possibly be what this child needed? Lucy looked up then, as if sensing his gaze. She waved at him through the window, her whole face lighting up with that smile that was so like her mother's. Ethan raised his hand in a small wave back, his heart pounding against his ribs like a drum. Ethan walked back into the church, his arms laden with rusty tools he'd managed to salvage from an abandoned maintenance shack behind the building. The metal handles felt cool against his calloused hands as he set them down near the altar. Dark clouds were gathering outside, and through the holes in the ceiling, he could see the gray sky threatening rain. His eyes wandered to the corner where the children had made their sleeping area, a collection of worn sleeping bags, blankets, and cushions arranged in a neat semicircle. Right above their makeshift bedroom, the roof sagged dangerously, wooden beams exposed through missing shingles. "That doesn't look good," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Tommy, the oldest boy, appeared at his side. "Are you going to fix it?" he asked, eyes bright with curiosity. "I can help. I'm good with tools." "Me too," Ben chimed in, his usual shyness forgotten in the excitement of potential construction work. Ethan studied their eager faces, then looked back at the roof. "Well," he said, scratching his beard, "we'll need to patch those holes before the rain hits. Might as well put you boys to work." He gathered what supplies he could find. Pieces of corrugated tin from behind the church, salvaged lumber, and a handful of bent nails he managed to straighten. With Tommy and Ben following close behind, Ethan carried everything outside and propped an old ladder against the church wall. "First rule of repairs," he said, testing the ladder's stability. "Always check your equipment." He showed them how to secure the base, explaining each step with patience he didn't know he possessed. The boys soaked up every word. Tommy proved to be a natural, quickly learning how to hold the hammer correctly and drive nails straight. Ben was more cautious but equally determined, carefully measuring and marking where patches needed to go. "Mr. Biker, sir," Sarah called from below, "your beard looks like a squirrel's nest when you look down." The other children giggled, and Ethan found himself chuckling despite himself. "That's so," he called back, stroking his wild facial hair dramatically. No, Rosie corrected, hands on her hips. "He's more like a grizzly bear." "Grizzly! Grizzly!" The younger ones started chanting, dancing around the ladder. And then something extraordinary happened. Ethan laughed, not just a polite chuckle or a forced smile, but a deep, genuine laugh that seemed to come from somewhere long forgotten inside him. The sound surprised him as much as it delighted the children. As the afternoon wore on, they fell into an easy rhythm. The older boys helped pass tools and materials, while the younger ones sorted nails and collected stray pieces of wood. Even Lucy pitched in, bringing them cups of water and announcing when she spotted new holes they'd missed. During a water break, Tommy sat next to Ethan on the church steps. "Mom used to fix things too," he said quietly, running his finger along the hammer's handle. "Not as good as you, though. She got sick that winter when the snow was really bad." The other children gathered closer, each carrying a piece of the story. "Miss Alma tried to help," Sarah added, her voice small. "But the roads were all blocked, and the phone lines were down." "Mom didn't wake up one morning," Rosie continued, her usual spunk subdued. Miss Alma said she went to heaven, but she promised to take care of us. Ben hugged his knees to his chest. The state people came once, with papers. They wanted to take us to different homes. But Miss Alma told them we weren't here anymore. She hid us in the cellar until they left. She says we're family, Lucy said firmly, reaching for Ethan's hand. And family stays together. A sudden harsh cough interrupted the moment. Luke, who had been unusually quiet, doubled over in a coughing fit that shook his small frame. His face turned red as he struggled to catch his breath. "Luke!" Sarah cried out, running to him. The boy tried to wave them away, but his legs gave out, and he collapsed onto the church steps. Ethan's heart jumped into his throat as he rushed to the child's side. "Where's the medical kit?" he demanded, supporting Luke's head. Tommy sprinted inside and returned with a battered first aid box. Ethan rummaged through it frantically, finding only a few bandages, some expired aspirin, and an old asthma inhaler. "Here, buddy, try this," he said, helping Luke with the inhaler. The boy took a shaky breath, then another. Slowly, his breathing steadied, though his face remained pale. "I'm okay," Luke whispered, trying to sit up. "It happens sometimes. I don't want anyone to worry." But Ethan had seen enough to know this was more than a simple cough. The boy's breathing was labored even at rest, and there was a weakness in his movements that spoke of chronic illness. That evening, after ensuring all the roof patches were secure, Ethan sat by the fire with Miss Alma. The wind had picked up outside, whistling through the newly repaired roof. The children were asleep in their corner, all except Luke, who wheezed softly in his sleep. "How long has he been sick?" Ethan asked quietly. "Since before he came to us," Miss Alma replied, her unseeing eyes directed toward the fire. "The doctors in the city said his lungs were damaged in a flood. He needs proper medical care, but—" She trailed off, her hands twisting in her lap. Ethan stared into the flames, thinking about Lucy, about Elena, about all these children who had somehow worked their way under his skin in just 2 days. "Miss Alma," he said, his voice rough, "if Lucy really is my daughter, I don't know if I can be what she needs, what any of them need. I couldn't even be there for my own son when—" "Sometimes," Miss Alma interrupted gently, "the ones who run the farthest are the ones needed most." The morning sun filtered through the patched roof, creating patterns of light on the church floor. Ethan stirred from his makeshift bed on the pew, his back protesting after another night on the hard wood. He glanced over at Luke's sleeping form and carefully made his way to check on the boy. Luke's breathing was steadier than the night before, but a slight wheeze still accompanied each breath. Ethan placed a weathered hand on the child's forehead. No fever, at least. Small mercies. In the makeshift kitchen area, Miss Alma was already awake, her hands moving confidently despite her blindness as she sorted through their dwindling supplies. "We've got some oatmeal left," she said, sensing Ethan's presence, "and a few cans of fruit. I'll see what I can do with that," Ethan replied, taking the items from her. He worked quietly, heating water over their small camping stove. The familiar sounds of children waking gradually filled the church. Whispered conversations, shuffling feet, occasional giggles. Sarah appeared first, as always, ready to help set out the chipped bowls they used for meals. "Can I stir?" she asked, reaching for the wooden spoon. "Sure thing, kid. Just be careful. It's hot." One by one, the other children emerged from their sleeping bags. Tommy helped Ben fold the blankets, while Rosie tried to tame Lucy's wild bedhead with an old brush. Luke joined them last, moving slowly but smiling as Ethan handed him a warm bowl. "I added extra brown sugar to yours," Ethan said quietly. The boy's eyes lit up with gratitude. After breakfast, Ethan grabbed his jacket and the faded hardware store flyer he'd found tucked in an old church bulletin. "I need to make a phone call," he announced. "Got to find some signal first. You kids stay with Miss Alma, all right?" "Can't we come?" Tommy asked, already reaching for his shoes. "Not this time, bud. Someone needs to keep an eye on things here." Ethan gave the boy's shoulder a squeeze, noting how Tommy straightened with pride at being trusted with responsibility. The morning air was crisp as Ethan walked through the village outskirts. Willow's End looked different in the morning light. Less haunting, more melancholy. Empty storefronts with faded signs told stories of better days. A rusted playground creaked in the breeze. He checked his phone periodically, watching for bars of service. The hill behind the old post office seemed promising. Ethan climbed carefully, testing his footing on the overgrown path. At the top, he held his phone up. One bar flickered into view. He dialed the number from the flyer quickly before the signal could disappear. After several rings, a young voice answered. "Anderson's Hardware, this is Mike." "Hey, I'm calling about getting some supplies delivered," Ethan said, pacing slightly to maintain the connection. "I'm out in Willow's End." "Willow's End? That old ghost town?" "Yay, that's the place. Look, I need some basic building materials. Roofing supplies, lumber, tools. Can you help?" There was a pause. "Sure, I guess. Dad usually handles deliveries, but he's laid up with his back. I could bring stuff out tomorrow morning if you've got cash." "Tomorrow's perfect. Cash won't be a problem." Ethan listed what he needed, adding extra items for future repairs he'd noticed around the church. As he headed back down the hill, a black SUV appeared on the gravel road that connected Willow's End to the highway. The vehicle slowed as it approached, dust billowing behind it. Ethan's military instincts kicked in. Something about the way it moved spoke of authority, of official business. The SUV stopped, and a man in a dark suit stepped out. Everything about him screamed government, from his polished shoes to his perfectly knotted tie. He adjusted his glasses as he approached Ethan. "Morning," the man said, his tone professionally neutral. "I'm Thomas Carlyle from the Regional Development Office. Mind if I ask what brings you to this area?" Ethan kept his face carefully blank. "Just passing through. Bike broke down." Carlyle glanced around the empty street. Quite a place to break down. You know, Willow's End was officially deemed abandoned 3 years ago. The whole area's been rezoned for industrial development. "Is that right?" Ethan's voice remained casual, but his heart rate picked up. "Indeed." Carlyle pulled out a tablet, scrolling through documents. "Construction's set to begin next month. Palmer Industries is building a distribution center here. The demolition crews will start clearing structures soon." Ethan's hands clenched inside his jacket pockets. "Seems like a waste of a historic town." "History doesn't pay taxes," Carlyle replied dryly. He looked up from his tablet, eyes sharp behind his glasses. "Mr. Matthews. Ethan Matthews. Mr. Matthews, I should inform you that if there are any unofficial residents in these buildings, they need to vacate immediately, especially if there are children involved." Ethan's poker face didn't slip. "Children? We've had reports." Carlyle's voice hardened slightly. "And I want to be clear. If there are undocumented minors here, child services will be notified. We don't take chances with children's safety." "Understood," Ethan said, forcing himself to meet Carlyle's gaze steadily. "But like I said, I'm just passing through." Carlyle handed him a business card. "In case you notice anything." That should be reported. With a final measuring look, he returned to his SUV and drove away. Ethan watched until the vehicle disappeared around a bend, then hurried back toward the church. As he approached, children's voices carried through the broken windows, singing by the sound of it. He slowed his pace, listening. "Daddy from the road, came to make our home, fixed our roof up high, taught us how to try. Grizzly beard so wild, makes us laugh and smile. Now we're not alone, 'cause Daddy's found his way home." The simple melody, clearly made up on the spot, hit Ethan like a physical blow. He stood in the doorway, watching them perform their little song with dramatic gestures. Lucy spun in circles while Tommy played air guitar. Sarah conducted with a stick, and even Luke joined in from his seat on a pew. They spotted him and beamed, proud of their creation. "Did you hear our song?" Lucy called out. "We made it just for you." Ethan managed a smile, but it felt heavy on his face. These children, who had already lost so much, had welcomed him into their makeshift family with open hearts. They'd turned him from a stranger into daddy in just a few days. And now, watching them sing and dance in their sanctuary, he knew their fragile peace was about to be shattered. The thought of them being separated, sent to different homes, made his chest ache in a way he hadn't felt since his own son. "Do you want us to sing it again?" Rosie asked, interpreting his silence as appreciation. "Please," he said softly, leaning against the doorframe. "I'd like that very much." The morning mist crept through Willow's End like ghostly fingers, wrapping around broken fences and abandoned porches. Ethan sat on the worn church steps, his leather jacket pulled tight against the dawn chill. The village square stretched before him, a patchwork of cracked pavement and stubborn weeds pushing through. From inside the church, Miss Alma's gentle humming drifted out. Amazing Grace, if he wasn't mistaken. The familiar tune carried memories of his own mother, of Sunday mornings long ago when life seemed simpler. He pulled out Carlyle's business card, turning it over in his calloused hands. The threat was clear. Child services wouldn't hesitate to take the kids. And what defense did they have? A blind caretaker and a broken-down biker weren't exactly what the system considered suitable guardians. The sound of approaching tires broke through his thoughts. The hardware store truck bumped down the old Main Street, a rusty red Ford with Anderson's Hardware painted on the side. The young driver, Mike, looked barely 20, wearing a worn baseball cap and a confused expression as he took in the abandoned buildings. "Over here," Ethan called. Standing up, Tommy and Ben burst out of the church doors behind him, excited by the newcomer. "Is that the supply truck?" Tommy asked, bouncing on his toes. "Sure is," Ethan replied. "Help Mike unload while I talk to him, okay?" The boys eagerly assisted with lumber and roofing materials. Ethan approached Mike. "Listen, any chance you're heading back to town right away?" "I could use a ride," Mike shrugged. "Sure, mister. Truck's empty now anyway." Sarah appeared in the doorway, Lucy clutching her hand. "You're leaving?" The worry in her voice made Ethan's chest tighten. "Just for today," he assured them, kneeling down. "Got some business to take care of in town. I'll bring back supplies, maybe even some candy if you're good." "And batteries?" Rosie called from inside. "For the radio?" "And batteries," he promised, with a small smile. The children gathered to wave goodbye as Mike's truck pulled away, their small figures growing distant in the side mirror. Ethan watched until the church disappeared around a bend, trying to ignore the knot in his stomach. The drive to town took nearly an hour, mostly silent, except for Mike's country radio playing softly. Millbrook wasn't much, a few thousand people at most, but after Willow's End, it felt like a metropolis. "Drop me at the courthouse," Ethan said as they entered town. Mike nodded, pulling up to a square brick building with American flags hanging limp in the still morning air. Inside, Ethan spent 2 hours being shuffled between offices, collecting forms and bitter disappointments. No birth certificates on file for most of the children. No school records. No social security numbers. The youngest girl, possibly his daughter, had no documentation at all. A tired-looking clerk in family services laid it out plainly. Without legal guardianship papers, those children are considered wards of the state. If they're found, they'll be placed in emergency foster care, probably separated due to space limitations. The thought of the kids being torn apart made him feel sick. What about becoming their guardian? What would that take? She looked at him skeptically. "Are you employed, Mr. Matthews?" "Not currently." "Own a home?" "No." "Any relation to the children?" He hesitated. "Maybe one, but I'd need a paternity test." She shook her head. "Even with proof of paternity for one child, you'd need stable housing, regular income, and clean background checks to be considered for fostering the others. The process takes months." Next stop was a small law office above a diner. The lawyer, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, listened to his story but offered little hope. "The system isn't designed for situations like this," she explained. "These children have essentially lived off the grid for years. Bringing them into the system now? Well, the authorities will have questions. Serious questions."
Ethan rubbed his face, feeling the weight of it all. There has to be something. There might be, she said carefully. But it would take time, money, and a lot of documentation you don't seem to have. The afternoon sun was dropping when Ethan finally made his way to the general store. He filled a cart with necessities. Canned
food, first aid supplies, warm blankets. He added children's vitamins, cough medicine for Luke, and a few small toys. A deck of cards, some colored pencils, a soft doll for Lucy. The elderly clerk watched him pile supplies on the counter. Quite a haul, she commented, ringing up the items. Got some kids to look after, Ethan said quietly. She studied him for a moment. You know, if you're needing help with children, the folks at Grace Baptist sometimes do legal advocacy work. They helped my niece with her adoption last year. Ethan tucked the information away, paid in cash, and caught a ride back to Willow's End with a friendly trucker. The sun was setting by the time he trudged up the church steps, arms full of supplies. The children swarmed him immediately, excited by the presents and treats. Even Luke managed a bright smile when Ethan handed him a new sweatshirt. They spent dinner showing him their drawings, playing with the cards, and planning what to fix next in their makeshift home. Later, after the kids were asleep, Ethan found Miss Alma in her small room. Candles flickered on her bedside table as he settled into the chair beside her, pulling out the stack of discouraging paperwork. They won't make it easy, he said, describing his meetings in town. The system, it's not built for this. Miss Alma's wrinkled hand found his in the dim light. Her fingers felt cooler than usual, frailer somehow. My time is growing short, Ethan, she whispered. The Lord has blessed me with many years, but I feel my strength fading. Fear gripped him. Miss Alma. These children, she continued, her sightless eyes glistening with tears. They're all I have left in this world. They've known too much loss already. Her grip tightened suddenly. Promise me, don't let them take my babies. Ethan held her thin hand between both of his, feeling the tremor in her fingers, seeing the plea in her face. The weight of her request settled over him like a heavy blanket, both comforting and overwhelming. I promise, he said softly, knowing as he spoke the words that they would change everything. Morning sunlight filtered through the broken stained glass windows, casting colored shadows across the church floor. Ethan stirred a large pot of porridge over the makeshift fire pit, adding the last of their honey to make it more appealing to the children. Breakfast, he called out, and within moments, the quiet sanctuary filled with the patter of bare feet and sleepy murmurs. Lucy, the youngest, skipped over to him first, her dark curls bouncing. She reminded him so much of Elena, the same warm brown eyes, the same gentle spirit. She hugged his leg as he handed her a bowl. Thank you, Daddy, she said simply, the word still catching him off guard every time. While the children ate, gathered in their usual circle on faded cushions, Ethan watched Lucy playing with her new doll. She was humming softly, lost in her own world. Carefully, he reached out and plucked a single strand of her hair. She didn't even notice, too absorbed in her game. He slipped the hair into a sandwich bag he'd saved from yesterday's supplies, tucking it securely in his jacket pocket. Outside, his motorcycle waited. He'd managed basic repairs yesterday, enough to get him into town and back. The morning air was crisp as he checked the oil and tested the throttle. Tommy appeared beside him, watching intently. Can I come with you today? Ethan shook his head. Not today, buddy. Need you here to look after the others. Remember what I taught you about the roof patches? Tommy stood straighter, proud to be trusted with responsibility. Check for leaks if it rains. Fix any loose edges with the hammer. That's right. Ethan ruffled the boy's hair. I'll be back before dark. The ride into Millbrook took 40 minutes. He found the clinic easily enough. A small brick building with a sign advertising various medical services, including DNA testing. Inside, the waiting room smelled of disinfectant and old magazines. A nurse with graying hair and kind eyes called him back. She listened patiently as he explained his situation. keeping the details vague but honest enough. The standard paternity test takes about 3 weeks for results, she explained, preparing the collection materials. We'll need a cheek swab from you today, and the child sample you brought. Ethan sat still as she swabbed the inside of his cheek, then carefully transferred Lucy's hair into the proper container. His hands felt clumsy as he filled out the paperwork, listing his contact information and trying to remember Elena's full name for the forms. "We'll call you when the results are ready," the nurse said, giving him a small smile. "Good luck." Grace Baptist Church sat on a corner 2 blocks away, its white steeple reaching into the morning sky. Ethan parked his bike, straightened his jacket, and walked up the steps, feeling out of place. The door opened before he could knock. A man about his age stood there, dressed casually in jeans and a flannel shirt. Only his collar gave away his profession. "I saw you pull up," the man said warmly. "I'm Pastor Josiah. Come on in." The pastor's office was comfortable, with worn leather chairs and bookshelves lined with well-used volumes. Family photos showed him in military uniform, Army chaplain insignias visible. "Afghanistan?" Ethan asked, nodding toward one of the photos. "2 tours, Josiah confirmed. "You served?" "Private contractor, after my regular service." Understanding passed between them, the kind that only comes from shared experiences. Josiah leaned forward. "Tell me about the children." Ethan did, laying out the whole situation. The abandoned village, the kids living off the grid, Miss Alma's declining health, and the threat of separation. He explained about Lucy, about Elena, about the paternity test he'd just submitted. "The system will split them up," he finished. "Their family to each other. I can't let that happen." Josiah nodded slowly. "You're right. The standard foster care process would almost certainly separate them. But there are emergency provisions for unique cases." He pulled out a legal pad. "We'll need character references, proof of your military service, and documentation of any relevant skills or training. I know some people in family court who might help expedite things." "I've got nothing to offer them," Ethan admitted. "No home, no job." "But you have something they need most," Josiah interrupted. "A father's heart. The rest we can figure out." They spent the next hour outlining a plan. Steps to establish temporary guardianship, possible housing solutions, job opportunities in town. Josiah made calls to colleagues, setting up meetings for the following week. "Come back tomorrow," the pastor said as Ethan prepared to leave. "I'll have some paperwork ready and we can start building your case." Back in Willow's End, the afternoon sun cast long shadows through the trees. Ethan parked his bike and walked quietly into the church, not wanting to wake the children if they were napping. The scene before him stopped him in his tracks. The children were indeed sleeping, all 6 of them curled around Miss Alma's chair like kittens seeking warmth. But something was wrong. The stillness was too complete. He moved closer, his boots silent on the wooden floor. Miss Alma sat in her favorite chair, her face peaceful, almost smiling. Her thin fingers were wrapped around her wooden rosary beads, worn smooth from years of prayers. But her chest didn't rise. Her hand, when he touched it, was cool. Ethan sank to his knees beside her chair, his throat tight. The children slept on, unaware that their beloved guardian had slipped away while watching over them one last time. Through the broken windows, an evening breeze carried the scent of wild roses, Miss Alma's favorite. The rosary beads caught the fading light, gleaming softly in her still hands. Gray morning light crept through the church windows, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floor. The children stirred one by one, their usual morning chatter absent. Grace was the first to fully wake, her eyes moving from Miss Alma's still form to Ethan's face. Understanding dawned in her expression, and she pressed herself against his side, her body shaking with silent sobs. Tommy woke next, his young face crumpling as he reached for Miss Alma's hand. "She's so cold," he whispered. The younger ones followed, their confusion turning to tears as the older children explained in gentle words what had happened. Sarah, barely 7, kept patting Miss Alma's arm as if trying to wake her. "But who'll tell us bedtime stories?" she asked, her voice small and lost. Ethan gathered them close, his weathered hands steady even as his heart ached. "Miss Alma," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "She loved you all so much. She's at peace now, watching over you from somewhere better." Ben, the quiet 9-year-old who rarely spoke, tugged at Ethan's sleeve. Can we put her in her garden? She always said that's where she felt closest to heaven." Ethan nodded, remembering the small plot behind the church where Miss Alma had maintained a few stubborn rose bushes and herbs. "That's a good idea, son. She'd like that." The morning air was cool as they stepped outside. Ethan had wrapped Miss Alma in her favorite quilt, carrying her with gentle reverence. The children followed in a solemn line, even the youngest sensing the gravity of the moment. Under the spreading branches of an ancient oak tree, where Miss Alma had often sat to tell stories, Ethan and the older boys began to dig. The earth was soft from recent rain, but the work was still hard. Tommy insisted on helping despite his small size, and Ethan showed him how to use the shovel properly. The other children gathered wildflowers from the overgrown garden. The last blooms of autumn, Rosie found some of Miss Alma's cherished roses, carefully avoiding the thorns as she picked them. Grace helped the younger ones weave the flowers into simple chains, just as Miss Alma had taught them. When the grave was ready, Ethan lowered Miss Alma's body with careful dignity. The children gathered around, each holding their flower offerings. One by one, they stepped forward to say goodbye. "Thank you for teaching me to read," Ben whispered. Placing a spray of purple asters on the quilt, Sarah laid down a crooked chain of daisies. "I'll remember all your songs, Mama Alma." Tommy added his flowers, tears streaming down his face. "You made the best soup, even when we didn't have much." Grace was last, holding a single perfect rose. "You saved us," she said simply, her voice breaking. "You loved us when no one else would." Ethan worked through the afternoon, fashioning a cross from pieces of sturdy oak he'd found in the church's old woodshed. His knife moved carefully over the wood, carving the words, "Alma, the light in the dark." The children watched him work, passing him tools when he needed them, staying close as if afraid he might disappear too. As evening approached, they gathered again at the grave. Ethan had found enough candles to give one to each child, and they stood in a circle, the tiny flames flickering in the growing darkness. "Miss Alma," Ethan began, his voice carrying in the still air, "I only knew you for a few days, but I saw what you built here. Some people just pass through life, leaving nothing behind. But others—" He looked at each of the children's faces, glowing in the candlelight. "Others leave a path. They show us how to be better, how to love deeper. They leave light in the darkness." The children repeated the word light softly, like a prayer. After they finished, no one wanted to go back inside the church right away. They sat together on the grass, sharing memories of Miss Alma, her funny sayings, her gentle hands, the way she could tell who was approaching just by their footsteps. "Who's going to take care of us now?" Luke asked finally, voicing the fear they'd all been holding. Ethan looked at their anxious faces, illuminated by the last remnants of daylight. He thought about the paternity test, about Pastor Josiah's promises to help, about all the obstacles ahead. But in that moment, only one answer felt right. "I will," he said firmly. "I promise." The children slowly drifted off to sleep that night, exhausted from grief and emotion. Ethan tucked each one in, just as he'd seen Miss Alma do. But Luke, the sick boy, stayed awake, sitting by the small fire they kept burning through the night. "Can I sit with you?" Ethan asked, settling down beside him. Luke nodded, pulling his blanket tighter around his thin shoulders. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the flames dance. "They tried to take us once before," Luke said suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Right after Mom died, Miss Alma hid us in the church basement. We could hear them calling, but she wouldn't let them find us." He looked up at Ethan, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "Please don't let them take us again." Ethan swallowed hard against the lump in his throat, seeing all the fear and hope in the boy's face. He nodded, putting his arm around Luke's shoulders. I won't, he said. I promise. 3 days after Miss Alma's funeral, morning sunlight streamed through the patched church windows. The biker, who the children now called Ethan, was scraping the last bits of oatmeal from a pot when his phone buzzed in his pocket. The text message was brief but made his heart skip. Results are ready. Please call or visit. He looked up at the children finishing their breakfast. The youngest girl, Annie, was carefully helping Sarah wipe milk from her chin. His hands trembled slightly as he put down the pot. I need to ride into town for a bit, he announced, trying to keep his voice steady. Tommy, you're in charge of dishes. Ben and Grace, make sure everyone stays inside the church grounds. Can't we come with you? Annie asked, her eyes bright with hope. Ethan shook his head, forcing a smile. Not today, sweetheart. But I promise we'll all go together soon. The ride into town felt longer than usual. Every mile marker seemed to taunt him with possibilities, both wonderful and terrifying. The clinic's parking lot was nearly empty when he arrived, his boots crunching on loose gravel as he dismounted. Inside, a young nurse handed him a sealed manila envelope without ceremony. Results are inside, she said kindly. Would you like to review them with the doctor? No, Ethan replied quickly. Thank you. He walked outside, his leather jacket creaking as he sat on a wooden bench near the clinic's entrance. The envelope felt heavy in his hands, weighted with more than just paper. Taking a deep breath, he broke the seal and pulled out the documents. His eyes scanned the medicals. Terminology until they found what mattered. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. The world seemed to tilt for a moment. He read it again, then a third time. Annie was his daughter. The truth he'd suspected, hoped for, and feared was now confirmed in clinical black and white. Relief flooded through him, followed immediately by a wave of anxiety. This paper protected one child, his child. But what about the others? The thought of the family being torn apart made his chest tighten. 20 minutes later, he parked his bike outside the small Methodist church where Pastor Josiah worked. The pastor was tending to a small vegetable garden when Ethan arrived, his clerical collar replaced by well-worn overalls. I was hoping you'd stop by today, Josiah said, brushing dirt from his hands. His weathered face crinkled with concern when he saw Ethan's expression. Come inside. Let's talk. In Josiah's modest office, Ethan handed over the test results. The pastor read them carefully, nodding slowly. This is good news, Josiah said. It gives us solid legal ground for Annie. But I sense you're worried about the others? They're a family, Ethan replied, his voice rough. All 6 of them. Breaking them up would destroy them. Josiah leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. I might know someone who can help. Let me make a call. An hour later, a woman in her 40s arrived. She introduced herself as Marlene Avery, a social worker who'd worked with Pastor Josiah before. Her gray suit seemed at odds with her kind eyes and practical demeanor. Pastor Josiah filled me in, she said, settling into a chair. It's an unusual situation, but not impossible. The court primarily looks for stability and community support. If you can demonstrate both, even temporarily, they might consider granting broader custody. What exactly does that mean? Ethan asked. Fix up the church. Make it livable. Show you can provide proper care, Marlene explained. Get the community involved. Letters of support, especially from respected figures like Pastor Josiah, can help. The more people vouching for you, the better. She paused, studying him carefully. But understand, this won't be easy. You'll need to prove you're committed for the long haul. Ethan nodded, determination settling over him like armor. Those kids are my responsibility now, all of them. The ride back to Willow's End was filled with plans forming in his mind. The church needed work, lots of it. But maybe that was exactly what they needed. A project to bring them together, to prove they could build something lasting. He found the children playing a makeshift board game they'd drawn on cardboard. They looked up expectantly as he entered, their faces bright with trust that still amazed him. Family meeting, he announced, settling onto the floor with them. We need to talk about making this place our home. For real, the children gathered closer, curious. Even little Sarah stopped playing with her doll to listen. The church needs fixing up, Ethan continued. It's going to take all of us working together. It won't be easy, but if we do it right, maybe. He paused, careful not to promise too much. Maybe we can stay together. Like a real family? Annie asked softly. We already are a real family, Tommy insisted. We just need to show everybody else. Ethan smiled, touched by the boy's certainty. Exactly. So what do you say? Ready to build something special? The enthusiasm was immediate. The children began shouting ideas. Everything from a treehouse to a garden like Miss Alma's. Ethan let them dream for a while before steering them toward more practical first steps. They started that very evening. Ethan found several partial cans of paint in the church basement, left over from years ago. The colors didn't match. There was sunny yellow, pale blue, and a warm cream. But somehow, that seemed perfect. He showed the children how to prep the walls, sanding rough spots and filling holes with putty. They worked together, music playing from Ethan's old battery-powered radio, their voices rising in occasional song. Tommy proved to be surprisingly good at cutting clean lines around windows. Ben, usually so quiet, became animated while choosing which colors should go where. Grace organized the younger ones into a paint roller assembly line, making sure everyone had a job. The mismatched colors began to transform the church's interior. What could have looked haphazard instead felt warm and personal, like a patchwork quilt made of light and color. Laughter echoed against the walls as Sarah accidentally painted Luke's nose blue, starting a gentle paint-dabbing war that Ethan had to referee. Annie worked diligently on a corner near the altar, her small face serious with concentration as she covered the old gray with sunshine yellow. Ethan stepped back to watch them work, his heart full in a way he hadn't felt in years. The scene before him was messy, imperfect, and absolutely beautiful. Paint-splattered children, working together, making something old into something new. This is starting to feel like home, he thought. And for the first time in years, the word didn't frighten him. The morning sun cast long shadows across Willow's End as Ethan hammered the last wooden sign into place along the main road. Community Cleanup Day, it read in bold red letters. Help needed. Free food. Save our kids. He'd spent the early hours setting up similar signs at key intersections, each one a beacon of hope. His phone felt strange in his hand. He hadn't used it much these past years except for emergencies. Now he was calling everyone who might help. Pastor Josiah? It's Ethan. Remember that community support you mentioned? He cleared his throat. Well, I'm calling in every favor I can think of. The pastor's warm chuckle carried through the line. Say no more. I'll spread the word. More calls followed. The Veterans Center where he'd started. Volunteering. The hardware store owner who'd been helping with supplies. Even the local diner where he'd become a regular customer. Each conversation ended with promises to come and bring others. By 9 o'clock, the kids were bouncing with excitement, watching the road from the church steps. Tommy had organized them into work crews, proud of his role as junior foreman. Look, Sarah shouted, pointing at a dust cloud in the distance. Someone's coming. The first vehicle to arrive was an ancient pickup truck loaded with lumber. Behind it came two minivans filled with church ladies bearing casseroles and cleaning supplies. Then came more trucks, cars, even a few motorcycles. Ethan recognized some fellow veterans he'd met at the center. Heard you needed some muscle, grinned Mike, a former Marine with a prosthetic leg, as he unloaded tools from his trunk. Plus, these church ladies promised pie. The village square slowly filled with volunteers. Some were former residents who'd moved away years ago, drawn back by nostalgia and purpose. Others were complete strangers, touched by the story of 6 orphans and their unlikely guardian. Ethan gathered everyone near the church steps. The children stood beside him, clean but nervous in their mismatched clothes. Thank you all for coming, he began, his voice rough with emotion. These kids, they deserve a real home, We can't do it alone." "Then it's a good thing you're not alone anymore," called out Mrs. Peterson, who ran the hardware store. "Now, where do we start?" The village came alive with activity. Teams spread out, tackling different projects. The veterans focused on structural repairs, while church groups organized cleaning brigades. Someone brought a portable generator, and power tools soon joined the symphony of hammers and saws. The children threw themselves into the work with enthusiasm. Ben and Tommy helped carry supplies, while Grace and Sarah became self-appointed refreshment coordinators, making sure workers stayed hydrated. Even little Annie found her role, charming volunteers with thank you drawings. Near noon, a white van with Channel 5 News pulled up. A young reporter stepped out, drawn by calls from locals about the unusual gathering. She watched as Ethan demonstrated proper hammering technique to the kids, their laughter echoing across the square. "Sir," she called out, "mind if we get your story?" Ethan hesitated, but Tommy spoke up. "Our dad's helping fix our home. You should see what we've done inside." The reporter's eyes softened at the word dad. She interviewed several volunteers, filmed the ongoing work, and captured precious moments. The children passing tools to adults, veterans teaching kids basic carpentry, women organizing a makeshift kitchen to feed the crews. The village well, long thought beyond repair, sparked back to life under the skilled hands of 2 retired plumbers. The first gush of clear water brought cheers from everyone. "Good pressure too," one plumber noted. "Just needed some TLC." As afternoon faded into evening, the transformation was remarkable. Fresh paint brightened weathered walls. New shingles patched leaky roofs, and cleared pathways replaced overgrown trails. The church, especially, glowed with renewal. Its windows cleaned, steps repaired, and garden beds prepared for planting. Pastor Josiah started a bonfire in the village square. People gathered around, sharing food and stories. The children, though tired, were too excited to sit still. They whispered among themselves before Tommy pulled out Miss Alma's old harmonica. "We wrote this song," Grace announced shyly. "It's for our dad." The simple melody carried across the quiet evening as 6 young voices joined together. "He rode in from nowhere, on a broken-down bike, found us in darkness, brought back the light. Our dad from the road. Now he's finally home. No more running away. No more being alone." Ethan blinked hard, overwhelmed by the moment. Around the fire, he saw misty eyes and gentle smiles. These strangers had become allies, invested in his family's future. Mrs. Peterson touched his arm. "My brother has a trailer home he's not using. It's just down the road, walking distance. It's yours if you want it," Pastor Josiah added, "and we need a handyman at the church. Steady work, fair pay. Enough to show the courts you can provide." Later, after the volunteers left and the children were tucked into their beds, real beds now, donated by the furniture store, Ethan stepped outside for a moment of quiet. The church looked different in the starlight, more alive somehow, more like home. He lit a cigarette, his last one he decided, and looked up at the stars. "We're almost there, Alma," he whispered. "Almost there." The crunch of tires on gravel cut through the night silence. Headlights appeared at the village entrance, and a black SUV rolled slowly down the dirt road toward them. The crunch of tires on gravel grew louder as the black SUV's headlights swept across the village square. Ethan dropped his half-finished cigarette and crushed it under his boot, straightening his spine as he watched the vehicle approach. His heart hammered against his ribs, but his face remained stoic, a skill learned from years in uniform. The SUV came to a stop, its engine purring in the midnight silence. 2 doors opened simultaneously, and out stepped a man and woman in crisp business attire, their badges catching the moonlight. A 3rd door opened, and a deputy emerged, his uniform neat and his expression professionally neutral. "Mr. Harrison?" The woman spoke first, her heels clicking on the gravel as she approached. Her voice was gentle but carried unmistakable authority. "I'm Linda Martinez from Child Protective Services. This is my colleague, Mr. Thompson, and Deputy Rogers." Ethan's throat felt dry. It's late for a social call. We received an anonymous tip, Mr. Thompson explained, consulting a tablet, concerning minors residing in condemned property without proper guardianship. The deputy shifted his weight, hand resting casually near his belt. We're here to ensure everyone's safety, sir, nothing more. Ethan's mind raced. He'd prepared for this moment, but not so soon. Not tonight. Look, he said, reaching slowly into his jacket. I have documentation. The paternity test just came back. For one child, Linda interrupted softly. We're aware. But there are 6 children here, Mr. Harrison. Inside the church, a floorboard creaked. Ethan's heart sank as he saw Tommy's face appear at the window, followed by the others. They must have heard the voices. Please, Ethan said, pulling out more papers. I have letters from the community. Pastor Josiah vouched for me. I've got a job lined up, housing arranged. Mr. Thompson scanned the documents with practiced efficiency. These are good starts, Mr. Harrison, but they're preliminary. No home study has been conducted. No background checks completed. No formal custody arrangements filed. The system exists to protect children, Linda added. Surely you understand that. The church door creaked open, and Sarah peeked out, her small hand clutching the doorframe. Dad? Her voice trembled. What's happening? The other children appeared behind her, their faces pale in the moonlight. The youngest girl, his daughter, proven by science now, ran to him and wrapped her arms around his leg. No, she cried. Don't let them take us. Linda stepped forward, her expression sympathetic but determined. Children, I know this is scary, but we need you to come with us for a little while, just until we sort everything out. You can't do this, Ethan growled, his hand protective on his daughter's shoulder. Look around. We've rebuilt this place. The whole town helped. These kids are cared for. They're loved. And that's wonderful, Mr. Thompson cut in. It will all be considered in the formal review. But right now, we have a legal obligation to ensure these minors are in state-approved care. The deputy moved closer. Sir, please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. Ethan felt the fight drain from him. He knew that tone, knew the weight of bureaucracy and protocol. One wrong move now could ruin any chance of getting them back legally. Tommy, brave as always, stepped forward. We won't go. You can't make us. But his voice cracked, betraying his fear. The other children huddled together, some crying quietly. Kids, Ethan said, his voice rough. Come here. They gathered around him, and he knelt down, looking each one in the eye. I need you to be brave for me, okay? This is temporary. I promise I'm going to fix this. But you're our dad now, Ben whispered, tears streaming down his face. Ethan pulled them into a group hug, his own eyes burning. And I always will be. Nothing changes that. But right now, I need you to go with these people, just for a little while. Linda approached with gentle efficiency, starting to guide the children toward the SUV. Each step felt like a knife in Ethan's chest. Wait! His daughter broke free and ran back, throwing her arms around his neck. Don't let them take me, Daddy. Please. Ethan held her tight, breathing in the scent of her hair. I'll come for you, sweetheart. I swear it. The deputy helped load their small bags, hastily packed with treasured possessions and new clothes from the community. One by one, the children climbed into the SUV, their faces pressed against the windows. We'll be in touch about next steps, Linda said quietly. The court will want to see stability, Mr. Harrison. Permanent housing, steady income, character references. I'll get it all, he interrupted. Whatever it takes. The SUV's doors closed with terrible finality. Ethan stood rooted in place as the engine started, watching helplessly as the vehicle began to turn around. 6 small hands pressed against the windows, 6 faces streaked with tears. The SUV's taillights grew smaller and smaller until they were just red dots in the darkness. Then they disappeared entirely, leaving nothing but a cloud of dust hanging in the moonlit air. Ethan remained standing in the gravel road, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles were white. The night seemed to press in around him, the silence deafening after so many weeks of children's laughter. Finally, his legs carried him back to the church. He pushed open the heavy door, stepping into the space that just hours ago had been full of life and hope. Now it felt cavernous, empty. He lowered himself onto the same pew where he'd first slept that fateful night, where it had all begun. But this time, there was no sound of children's breathing, no whispered conversations, no small feet padding across creaky floorboards. This time, he was alone. Sunlight streamed through the broken stained glass windows, painting fractured rainbows across Ethan's face. His eyes opened slowly, body stiff from another night on the hard wooden pew. The silence hit him first. No giggling, no whispered conversations, no small feet pattering across creaky floorboards. Just emptiness. He pushed himself up, his joints protesting. The children's sleeping bags still lay scattered where they'd left them, a half-finished drawing abandoned on the floor. Tommy's toolkit sat next to the wall they'd been fixing. Sarah's favorite stuffed rabbit, forgotten in the rush, stared at him with button eyes. Walking through the village felt like moving through molasses. Every step brought another memory. The hopscotch squares they'd drawn in chalk, the garden they'd started clearing, the roof they'd patched together. The village had come alive with their presence. Now, it felt like a ghost town again. Ethan's motorcycle roared to life, the sound echoing off empty buildings. The 30-mile ride into town passed in a blur of autumn colors and mounting anger. By the time he parked outside the Department of Social Services, his jaw was set with determination. The office was a bland government building with fluorescent lights and motivational posters. A receptionist looked up as he approached, her smile professional but wary. "I need to know where they took my kids," Ethan said, his voice rough from lack of sleep. "Sir, you'll need to speak with a caseworker. Do you have an appointment?" "No appointment, but I've got their paperwork right here." He pulled out the folder containing everything: the paternity test, job offer, housing arrangements, character references. "Just tell me where they are." A door opened and Linda Martinez emerged, the same social worker from last night. Her face softened with recognition. "Mr. Harrison, please come to my office." The office was small but neat, with children's drawings pinned to a corkboard. Linda sat behind her desk, gesturing for Ethan to take a seat. "The children are safe," she began, "but I cannot disclose their location while the case is under review." "Review!" Ethan's hands gripped the armrests. "They were safe with me. We had a home. An abandoned church in a condemned village is not suitable housing for minors, Mr. Harrison. There was no running water, no proper heating system. We were fixing it. The whole town was helping. Did you see what we'd accomplished in just a few weeks?" Linda's expression remained sympathetic but firm. "Good intentions aren't enough. We need to ensure long-term stability. The children require proper schooling, medical care." "The youngest is my daughter," Ethan interrupted, pushing the paternity test forward. "That's proven now. Yes, for one child. But there are 5 others with no biological connection to you. No legal guardianship established. We have protocols." "Protocols?" Ethan stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "Those kids were abandoned by your protocols. Miss Alma was the only one who cared enough to keep them together. And now—" His voice caught. "I understand you're upset," Linda said softly. "But until we complete our investigation and you can demonstrate a stable, suitable environment, I cannot—" Ethan didn't wait to hear the rest. He stormed out of the building, his boots heavy on the linoleum floors. Outside, he leaned against his motorcycle, trying to steady his breathing. Then, he remembered Pastor Josiah's words. Sometimes, the loudest voice isn't the angriest one. It's the one that knows how to rally others. 20 minutes later, he pulled up to the small local newspaper office. The reporter who'd covered their community cleanup day, Sarah Chen, was just arriving with a coffee in hand. "Mr. Harrison?" She recognized him immediately. I was actually going to call you. That piece about the village restoration? People can't stop talking about it. How'd they like to hear what happened next? Ethan asked grimly. Inside her cluttered office, Sarah listened intently as Ethan shared everything. Finding the children, discovering his daughter, the community's support, and the midnight removal. Her fingers flew across her keyboard, eyes widening at certain details. This is more than just a human interest story, she said finally. This is about system failure, about community versus bureaucracy. Mind if I call Pastor Josiah for his perspective? Pastor Josiah arrived within the hour, his presence immediately filling the small office with calm authority. The church stands with you, Ethan. Our congregation has been asking how to help since they took the children. They spent the next few hours crafting a strategy. Sarah would run the story in tomorrow's paper and contact regional news outlets. The pastor would organize a prayer vigil and start a petition. They created a social media campaign. #BringThemHome. By afternoon, things were moving faster than Ethan could have imagined. A retired lawyer named James Mackenzie called, offering his services pro bono. My wife read about your situation online, he explained. We fostered children for 20 years. The system needs good people like you, not more red tape. The town square filled that evening with hundreds holding candles. Ethan watched from the back as Pastor Josiah led the crowd in prayer. People he barely knew came up to sign the petition, share stories, offer help. Some had supplies ready for when the children returned. Clothes, books, toys. Others offered professional services, plumbing work, electrical repairs, tutoring. The thing about small towns, Sarah said, snapping photos of the vigil, is that they take care of their own. Those kids became part of this community the moment you brought them here. Signatures on the petition climbed past 300. Online donations started flowing in for home repairs and legal fees. Local businesses pledged support. The hardware store promised building materials. The diner offered free meals. The medical clinic volunteered checkups. It was nearly midnight when Ethan finally rode back to Willow's End. The church looked different in the dark, its windows like empty eyes. He walked past it to the small garden where they'd buried Miss Alma, her wooden cross silvered by moonlight. Kneeling in the cool grass, Ethan touched the cross gently. I don't know if you can hear me, Alma, he said quietly, but I want you to know. I'm going to bring them home. All 6 of them. His voice grew stronger. You kept them together when nobody else would. Now it's my turn. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, I promise. They're coming back. The autumn wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of wood smoke and fallen leaves. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called out in the darkness. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as Ethan adjusted his borrowed tie for the 10th time. The collar felt like it was choking him, a far cry from his usual leather jacket and riding gear. Pastor Josiah stood beside him, a steadying presence in his pressed black suit, while James Mackenzie, their pro bono lawyer, reviewed documents one final time. Remember, James said, shuffling papers into his briefcase. Let me do most of the talking. When it's your turn to speak, just be honest. The judge needs to see the man these children already know, not who you think she wants to see. Ethan nodded, his throat too dry for words. His weathered hands kept returning to his coat pocket, checking that everything was still there. The paternity test results, employment confirmation from the church's maintenance department, hundreds of petition signatures, and photographs showing the village's transformation. Each document felt like it carried the weight of 6 young lives. The courthouse interior smelled of furniture polish and anxiety. Their footsteps echoed off marble floors as they made their way through security and up to the second-floor courtroom. Other people waited in the hallway, lawyers in sharp suits, families looking worried. But Ethan barely noticed them. His mind kept drifting to the children, wondering if they were scared, if they were being treated well, if they still believed he'd bring them home. All rise, the bailiff called as they entered courtroom B. Judge Patricia Martinez was a small woman with steel gray hair and reading glasses that hung from a chain around her neck. Her expression gave nothing away as she reviewed the case file. The social worker, Linda Thompson, presented the state's case first. Her voice was professional, methodical, laying out facts like bricks in a wall between Ethan and the children. The property in question was legally condemned 3 years ago. None of the children were enrolled in school. There was no running water, inadequate heating, and until recently, no legal guardian present. She paused, glancing at her notes. While we acknowledge recent community efforts to improve conditions and Mr. Harrison's apparent good intentions, the department's primary concern must be the children's safety and stability. Ethan's fingers dug into his palms as she continued, detailing every deficiency, every reason why he wasn't good enough. Pastor Josiah touched his arm lightly, a silent reminder to stay calm. James Mackenzie rose next, his approach different, warmer, more human. He began with Ethan's military service record, his clean background check, the job offer and housing arrangements. Then he moved to the improvements made to Willow's End. New wiring, repaired plumbing, reinforced structures, all documented with before and after photographs. Your Honor, James said, spreading the community petition across his table, these signatures represent more than just support. They represent a community coming together to help raise these children. Local teachers have offered homeschooling to help them catch up academically. The medical clinic has volunteered regular checkups. The hardware store has pledged building materials to continue renovations. He called Pastor Josiah to testify next. The pastor's voice filled the small courtroom with quiet authority as he described finding Ethan fixing the church roof that first week, teaching the older boys basic carpentry, making sure everyone had warm meals. I've counseled many people in my years of ministry, Pastor Josiah said, and I know genuine change when I see it. These children haven't just found a caretaker in Ethan. They've found a father. And he's found his purpose. Letters from townspeople were entered into evidence. The diner owner who described Ethan bringing the kids in for hot chocolate on cold mornings. The librarian who caught him teaching the youngest to read. The veterans group leader who vouched for his character. Finally, it was Ethan's turn to speak. He stood slowly, his legs feeling unsteady. The judge's gaze fell on him, patient but unreadable. He cleared his throat, started again. I know how this looks. I'm not what anyone would picture as a father. Been riding alone most of my life, trying to outrun my mistakes. His voice grew stronger as he continued. I didn't go looking for those kids, but they found me, and they called me Dad before I ever believed I was worthy of it. He pulled the worn photograph from his pocket, Elena holding their baby daughter, and placed it carefully on the evidence table. I may not have much, but I've got enough love to raise them. And I've got a whole town behind me, making sure I do it right. The room fell silent when he finished. Judge Martinez removed her glasses, studying him for a long moment before speaking. I will review all evidence presented and return a ruling in 48 hours. Court is adjourned. The bang of her gavel made Ethan jump slightly. As people began filing out of the courtroom, he felt drained, like he'd just fought the hardest battle of his life with nothing but words as weapons. In the hallway, through the large windows, he caught movement that made his heart stop. The children were there, waiting with their temporary foster caretaker. They looked smaller somehow, subdued in their clean, pressed clothes. The youngest girl pressed her hand against the glass when she saw him, her small face lighting up. She mouthed something silently through the window. Hi, Daddy. Ethan's hand lifted automatically to wave, but Pastor Josiah gently steered him toward the exit. Those 2 days of waiting were going to feel like an eternity. Morning mist clung to the overgrown grass around Willow's End Church as Ethan sat on the worn steps, watching the sun creep over the horizon. His weathered hands couldn't stay still, alternating between drumming against his knee and running through his graying hair. The past 48 hours had been the longest of his life. The renovated church stood quiet behind him, its fresh paint and patched roof a testament to how much had changed since he first broke down outside this forgotten village. Birds called softly in Bingyemoa, the distance, and somewhere a screen door creaked in the morning breeze. The sound echoed through the empty streets that had, just weeks ago, been full of volunteers and hope. His phone sat heavy in his palm, screen dark and silent. He'd barely slept, jumping at every noise, expecting a call that never came. Now, as dawn painted the sky in soft pinks and golds, he couldn't stop staring at it, willing it to ring. When it finally buzzed, the vibration nearly caused him to drop it. James Mackenzie's name flashed on the screen. Ethan's hand shook as he swiped to answer, his throat suddenly dry as sandpaper. "Hello?" His voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. "Ethan?" James's voice crackled through the speaker. "Judge Martinez just called." The pause felt eternal. Ethan's free hand gripped the wooden step beneath him so hard his knuckles turned white. "She's granting you full custody of Sarah. That's legally binding, given the paternity test. And..." James paused, and Ethan could hear papers shuffling. "Foster guardianship has been approved for the other 5 children, pending regular check-ins and supervision for the first 6 months." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Ethan pressed his palm against the rough wood of the step to steady himself. They can come home?" The words felt strange in his mouth, like a language he was just learning to speak. "Yes," James confirmed, and Ethan could hear the smile in his voice. "They can come home today. The social worker is already processing the paperwork at the center. I'll meet you there in an hour to handle the final signatures." Ethan mumbled something that might have been thank you. Though he wasn't sure any actual words came out, he sat there for several minutes after hanging up, letting the news sink in, letting himself believe it was real. Finally, he stood on shaky legs and walked to the church parking lot where Pastor Josiah's old blue pickup truck waited. The pastor had left it there the night before, keys under the mat, just in case. The engine coughed to life on the second try. The drive into town felt surreal. Streets he'd traveled dozens of times in the past few weeks looked different somehow, as if the whole world had shifted slightly on its axis. He passed the hardware store where he'd bought supplies for the village repairs, the diner where he'd first heard about Pastor Josiah, the clinic where he'd gotten the paternity test. Each place held a piece of the path that had led him here. The Children's Services Center was a plain brick building with cheerful cartoon paintings on the windows that couldn't quite hide its institutional nature. Ethan parked in the nearly empty lot, his hands still gripping the steering wheel as he tried to calm his racing heart. James was waiting outside, briefcase in hand, looking fresh despite the early hour. "Ready?" he asked as Ethan approached. Before Ethan could answer, the center's front doors burst open. 6 familiar faces appeared, and the world suddenly narrowed to just this moment, just these children running toward him across the asphalt. "Dad!" The cry came from multiple voices at once. They hit him like a wave, small arms wrapping around his waist, his legs reaching up to be lifted. He caught Sarah, his daughter, first, swinging her up as the others pressed in close. Tommy, the oldest, tried to play it cool for about 2 seconds before joining the group hug. Ben's glasses were crooked from the rush. Rosie was already talking a mile a minute about everything they needed to do when they got home. Ethan found himself kneeling on the pavement, gathering them all close, his vision blurring. They were wearing new clothes, donated probably, but they smelled the same, felt the same in his arms. His kids, his family. "We knew you'd come back," Sarah whispered against his neck. "We knew you wouldn't leave us." Marlene Avery, the social worker, stood in the doorway watching the reunion with a slight smile. When Ethan finally managed to look up, she stepped forward with a thick folder of papers. "Let's go inside and make this official," she said warmly. "We'll need signatures, and we'll go over the supervision schedule." She glanced at the children, still clinging to Ethan like they might never let go. "But something tells me this is already more than just a trial run. They're already home." The paperwork took less than an hour. though it felt both longer and shorter somehow. The children sat unusually quiet while the adults handled the formalities, as if too much noise might make it all disappear. Ethan signed his name so many times his hand cramped, but he didn't care. Each signature was a promise. To the courts, to the kids, to himself. Finally, they were walking back to the truck. The children piled in eagerly, squeezing together in the cab. Sarah claimed the middle spot right next to him, her small hand finding his as soon as he slid behind the wheel. The drive back to Willow's End was filled with chatter. The kids pointed out everything that had changed while they were gone. New flowers blooming in the community garden they'd started. Fresh gravel on the road. A family of rabbits that had moved into the old Anderson place. As they pulled up to the church, their excitement bubbled over. They tumbled out of the truck before Ethan had fully stopped, racing up the steps and through the doors like they were afraid it might all vanish if they didn't claim it quickly enough. Ethan followed more slowly, watching as they ran from room to room. Tommy and Ben immediately checked on their project corner where they'd been learning basic carpentry. Rosie found her favorite blanket right where she'd left it and hugged it tight. The younger ones pulled out toys and books, already arguing over who got to play with what first. In the quiet of all that chaos, Ethan walked to the mantel where photographs and memories were displayed. He pulled Miss Alma's wooden rosary from his pocket. Pastor Josiah had been keeping it safe, and placed it carefully among the frames. His fingers lingered on the smooth beads as he whispered, "We did it." The sound of children laughing echoed through the old church walls, bringing life back to every corner. They were home. All of them. The morning sun cast long shadows across Willow's End as Ethan walked down the freshly graveled Main Street. 6 months had transformed the once abandoned village into something entirely new. White picket fences lined neat gardens where wildflowers and vegetables grew side by side. The old water well, now fully restored, sparkled with a fresh coat of blue paint that Tommy had insisted on. At the village entrance, a hand-carved wooden sign swung gently in the breeze. Camp Redemption, a place for new beginnings. Ben had drawn the design, and Ethan had spent 3 weekends carefully bringing it to life with his carving tools. The letters were deep and clean, filled with dark stain that made them stand out against the natural wood. In what used to be Wilson's general store, Ethan had set up his repair shop. The large windows let in plenty of light, perfect for working on everything from motorcycles to lawnmowers. Tools hung in neat rows on pegboards, and the old counter now served as his workbench. The familiar smell of motor oil and metal mixed with fresh coffee from the pot that was always brewing. The church, their home, had undergone the most dramatic transformation. The sanctuary still held its reverent atmosphere, but now doubled as a bright classroom during the day. Mrs. Patterson, a retired teacher from town who'd fallen in love with the children, came 3 times a week to teach. Her gentle methods and endless patience had worked miracles. Ethan paused in the doorway, watching as she worked with Luke on his reading. The boy who once could barely get through a sentence without stuttering now read clearly, his finger tracking steadily across the page of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. His chest was clear too. The combination of proper medical care and clean air had worked wonders for his lungs. The boys had to take turns at reading aloud, Luke read confidently, and the girls did the same, and the little children had their spelling classes and... He looked up with a bright smile when he noticed Ethan. "Dad, did you hear me? No stops." "Sure did, buddy. You're getting better every day." Ethan ruffled the boy's hair as he passed. The back rooms had been converted into proper bedrooms, with real beds donated by the church and colorful quilts made by the ladies' sewing circle in town. Sarah and Rosie had decorated their walls with pressed flowers and Ben's drawings. Tommy had built shelves for his growing collection of mechanical books. Outside, the garden that Miss Alma had tended now flourished under Sarah's careful attention. She had her mother's green thumb, Ethan realized with a bittersweet smile. Every Saturday, volunteers from town would arrive with supplies, books, and games. Many stayed to help with repairs or simply to play with the children. Just yesterday, Martha from the diner had pulled Ethan aside and asked how she might help foster a child herself. Seeing what you've done here, she'd said, wiping tears from her eyes, it makes me think maybe I could do something too. The sound of laughter drew his attention to the yard where the younger kids were playing tag. Luke, once too weak to run, now darted between the others with impressive speed. Their shrieks of joy echoed off the buildings, bringing life to every corner of the once silent village. Ethan sat at his workbench, looking over invoices for recent repairs. His fingers traced the business license framed on the wall, official proof that he was no longer just a drifter, but a legitimate businessman. Next to it hung his foster care certification, each child's name carefully typed beneath his own. The afternoon mail brought an official-looking envelope. Inside was a letter from the State Historical Society. Ethan read it twice, his hands trembling slightly. They were considering designating Willow's End as a historic village and community sanctuary. The letter praised the restoration work and the innovative approach to community-based childcare. As evening approached, visitors began arriving for the monthly community dinner. The tradition had started small, just Pastor Josiah and a few church members, but had grown to include dozens of supporters. Folding tables dotted the village square, laden with covered dishes and desserts. The children had been practicing their song all week for this moment. They lined up on the church steps, nervous energy making them fidget until Mrs. Patterson gave them their starting note. The melody began softly, growing stronger as they gained confidence. Ethan sat near the bonfire, watching as his children, and they were truly his now, in every way that mattered, sang their hearts out. The song had evolved over the months, new verses added about Miss Alma's gentle wisdom, and their road dad who found his way home. Their sweet voices carried across the square, bringing tears to more eyes than just his own. When they finished, the applause was thunderous. The children beamed with pride, taking exaggerated bows that made everyone laugh. As the crowd dispersed to fill plates and find seats, Sarah made her way to where Ethan sat. She climbed into his lap without hesitation, fitting perfectly in the space that seemed made just for her. Her small hands played with the zipper of his leather jacket, the same one he'd worn that first day, riding into town. "We're never letting you leave again, Daddy," she whispered, resting her head against his chest. Ethan wrapped his arms around her, breathing in the scent of sunshine and wildflowers in her hair. His heart felt so full it might burst. "I'm already home," he replied softly, his voice rough with emotion. Behind them, the newly painted sign caught the last rays of sunlight, its message clear and true. Camp Redemption, where every child deserves a second chance.